Hello, Group C. I currently have 0 viewers, but I'm sure that more will come. I have a quick story to tell you before you begin. My story is this. I work in a Walter Cronkite School of Journalism professional program from 8:30 in the morning to 6 at night. On Mondays and Wednesdays, as it is a Wednesday, I also tutor graduate students from 6:15 to 7:15 p.m. So I had about 15 minutes to get from here, from there to here, get this all set up, and try and eat some of my dinner. Well, there's still dinner here. So, long story short, if you hear chewing during the tip session, don't be worried. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, like I did before, I'm gonna share my screen with you guys, and I'm gonna pull up the PowerPoint presentation for the tip session for project number 2. So I'm sharing my screen now. I'm sharing my entire screen because I've had problems when it hasn't shared the whole screen before. Presenting to everyone. Okay, so here is Project 2 tips and tricks for succeeding on Project 2 in English 101. So this is an interesting project because a lot of this tip session is literally just going through and telling you guys what the assignment is, because there's been this sort of historical ongoing issue with students just missing parts of the assignment. So, you know, just be aware that a lot of what I'm giving you is details on how to execute this correctly. I made a good grade. Okay, so here are a couple sentences I pulled from the project overview because I feel like they're really important. First, the majority of your essay should focus on what story the photographer is trying to share with you through the camera lens. Second, the majority of your writing should focus on analysis, illustrating how the photographer uses the rhetorical appeals to compose ideas about family traditions, culture, economics, nutrition, and/or globalization. I don't even like grapes, but they're like the only small things that I can just eat a piece of from what I have for dinner. So that's what I'm doing. So what's important to look at in this first sentence is that the idea is that what you're doing is showing what story the photographer is trying to tell. A lot of people tend to miss this. They break down the photograph into rhetorical appeals, but they don't actually tie it to any sort of lesson or main idea or thing the photographer is trying to say. Or we have an issue where the paper talks a lot about a main idea or something that they learned from the photographer, or on the other hand, a lot of information about the culture that they're writing about, but there's not a lot of analysis that breaks down how the rhetorical appeals are being used to show a main idea, to support a main idea that the photographer wants to get across. So we know some of Menzel's ideas from his TED Talk. When you look at your photograph, which of the ideas that he talks about in that TED Talk do you think is best represented through his photograph? How does he use the rhetorical appeals to get that idea across? So I have a little breakdown here of sort of the way that you're going to sort of pull these things together. It basically is highest level, like biggest, most abstract part of your paper that's going to be over the course of the whole paper to like the smallest components that make up how you're going to do that, right? So the biggest thing is Menzel's idea. That's going to be your broad, quote-unquote, umbrella or overarching thing that's going to tie the whole paper together. The entire thing needs to be focused around what idea is Menzel getting across. The rhetorical appeals are how he gets it across, but the rhetorical appeals are made using specific visual elements of the image, and different specific visual elements are going to be used to make these broader rhetorical appeals. And then you've got your secondary sources of cultural background that back up how those rhetorical appeals are being made. You don't want to get lost in the cultural background, which I think I'll talk about in a little bit, but that's an issue that I've seen in this paper a lot, is that students just end up writing a research paper about Iceland or about Japan, and that's not what you're trying to do. You need to stay really focused on, one, the photograph that you're looking at, and two, how the parts of that photograph are making rhetorical appeals in order to get one big main idea across. So the primary question you want to answer, how does Menzel use the parts of the image, words, phrases, specific images within the image, colors, patterns, spatial arrangement, to make rhetorical appeals, that's ethos, logos, and pathos, that present a particular story or idea? I want to give you guys an example of how to do this, because I can see where, okay, like, I understand what I'm being told to do, but I don't know how to do it. So I want to give you guys an example. I picked this photograph because I've never seen a student analyze this photograph. It's a family from Poland. Students tend to pick different things. I think things that maybe they're less familiar with or more familiar with. This is somewhere in the middle. So what I did is I just looked at, first, all I did was pull out the main things that I saw in the photograph, the main photographic elements. So it's brightly lit. I'm especially looking at this area back here, right? But throughout everything, there's like these really bright colors, right? There's not a lot of dark colors in this photograph. You're looking at, he's got a light blue shirt, you've got these bright pink flowers, he's got a white shirt, she's wearing like pink. Everything's kind of light in this photograph. Except for, and I'm gonna go down here to mirroring, except for the couch, which is kind of a dark red, and these cabinets, which are also kind of a dark red. And so I pulled that out as an element of mirroring, because you've got that sort of dark red framing either side of the photograph, and mirroring, they mirror each other in the image. Leading lines. Leading lines are sort of a big thing that you'll see in photography, and one of the things you see here is that all of the lines in this room lead back to this sort of brighter area, which draws the eye toward it. And I don't know, how, I think that's just an element of composition that Menzel pulls in, but that's another thing that I see. The positions of the people is another thing that you can look at. Like, you can see here, he's sort of brought right into the middle of the photograph, the, older pair, and then there's these two back here, and then she's down here with the dog, it looks like. So how do the positions of the people bring the photograph together? Where are they positioned? And then later, what can that mean? There's also text in this photograph. The caption at the bottom is a text element. One thing that I pulled out because I thought it was interesting, because I was like, why would the photographer put that there? Is this giant stuffed elephant that's at the front of the image? That's fascinating to me. It would be an interesting thing to actually go into more depth and analyze, like, why would Menzel think that that's the best thing to place right there at the front of this image? Because, again, you've got these leading lines, right? So everything's leading back toward this, or frontwards toward this elephant. So that was fascinating to me. I don't know what it means, because I'm not doing a full analysis of this image, but it is something that I pulled out. And then there's also the image content, which is something that a lot of the people who I've seen write these essays tend to get really focused on. Where the food is placed, where the members of the family are placed, which is something I sort of highlighted. I think in positions of people, it's also how are they positioned in reference to each other, right? Like, he's standing side by side, she's right behind him, she's laying down on the couch. But the placement of the food, the placement of the family members, the fact that there's a dog, which shows that the dog matters, they treat it like a family member, etc. But all of these are just parts of the image that can make a larger argument. When you look at the image, you want to stay really focused on what are the specific, like, small, clear details of the image. Like the fact that there are these leading lines that lead back here or toward here. The fact that there's this mirroring of color. The fact that the colors that are used are bright throughout. The fact that this back here is blown out, washed out. Why are those choices being made? Why is the photographer doing those things? Is what gets us into the rhetorical appeals. So connections between the parts of the image and the rhetorical appeals are crucial. So I used a couple examples in terms of things that I pulled out here. So for example, leading lines. I talked a lot about that. So I'm looking at the ethos appeal right now. That's all I'm looking at. So I used this as an example of a way that you can say he's making an ethos appeal. Now, I know that Menzel's a professional photographer because he uses those leading lines to make a clean, well-organized photograph that looks professional. And because I know this, I trust him to represent things in a powerful way for the eye, which makes me trust him as a photographer. So what I'm doing there is I'm connecting his use of leading lines to his ability to make a trust appeal, to make an ethos appeal. And it's not just me saying, well, Menzel makes an ethos appeal by using leading lines, right? I explain why that's an ethos appeal. I explain why that makes me trust him. In the same way, I know that he interviewed this family and did research on how their currency relates to that of the United States because of the caption here, this many, I can't pronounce that, or 150, 127 in US dollars. So there, it's clear that he did the research that shows that he knows the exchange rate and that he's paying attention. This makes me trust him because based on knowing their favorite recipe or their family recipe and the fact that he knows the exchange rate, he's done research about their culture, he knows the family, he's not just pulling this out of nowhere, and that makes me more likely to trust him. But you see how I had to break it down and explain those things to you. I didn't just say, well, you know, he uses the exchange rate in the caption and that's what makes me trust him. I have to say, the fact that he uses the exchange rate shows me as a viewer that he has done the research required to be trustworthy in the claim that he's making about this family and their culture. It's clear he knows what he's talking about, and that's why I trust him. So making sure that the connections you're making are clear and obvious is really central to being successful in this paper. Then once you've talked about the claims he's made, it's really important to tie the rhetorical analysis back to the larger message he's sending. Now, in terms of something like ethos makes the larger claim often because you're just more likely to trust what he's saying. Here, I made up a message. I just made this up. I did it to use it as an example. But by inspiring my trust in him as a photographer, 1, and as a researcher, 2, he makes me more likely to believe his message that retaining culture through food is crucial to individual and family happiness. Now, okay. In a lot of cases, what you do is you would make sure that the rhetorical appeal is tied to this thing, right? So ethos appeals might not be making his exact argument, which logos and pathos appeals often do, but they support the argument by getting me to trust how he chooses to make it. I know he's done the research to come to this conclusion. I know he's presenting his photo in a way that portrays the idea, but is doing so in a professional and ethical way. Now, something like logos, right? You might say, oh, retaining culture through food is crucial to individual and family happiness. You might want to say, okay, so he's making this logos appeal or a pathos appeal. I feel happy because I'm looking at the bright colors in the photo. So bright colors are often aligned with feeling happy. That's just something that we've always seen. If you wanted to pull in a research source to back up a statement like that, you definitely could. So if bright colors lead us to feel happy, and I look at the colors in this photo and they make me feel sort of peppy and cheery inside, they also make me feel like the family is happy. So that transfers how I'm feeling back onto what I'm seeing and how I'm perceiving the family. And that makes a pathos appeal, not because he's necessarily telling me, feel happy, but because there's bright colors. I feel happy. I reflect that happiness back onto the family. And that helps make his appeal having to do with individual and family happiness, right? So that's an example of how that pathos appeal might be being made that has a clearer tie to the message that he's getting across. But again, I just broke down why I think that to you in really, really clear terms. And that's something you need to make sure you're doing for your readers. Make sure your thought process is clear to them. Don't jump over any steps in your thought process in order to, either because you assume that readers will understand them or because it doesn't occur to you that you need to explain them. They always need to be explained because not everybody's mind is going to work like yours. Secondary sources and cultural background. So I talked a little bit about this already, but you have to remember the purpose of this paper. Don't get lost in all the information about the culture. It's supplemental information. This is just like how it's supposed to get used in your profile piece. It's supplemental information that you use to back up your main point. When you include information about the country or culture you're analyzing, ask yourself, Does this support my claim about the point through use of rhetorical appeals in this image? If not, take it out. I don't care how fascinating it is to you that the country food of Scotland is blank. If that's not part of the photograph and if it's not part of your claim, take it out, even if it's interesting. Because the point of this paper is not to talk about what's interesting. The point of this paper is to really go in depth on this one image and break it down. If the information you're using does support your claim, have you made that clear to readers? So this is what I've been talking about with making sure that readers follow every step of your logical process. So I pulled together this information from the Better Life Index, which looks at satisfaction with life, basically. And I found that when asked to rate their general satisfaction with life on a scale from 0 to 10, polls gave it a 5.8 grade, which is lower than the average of 6.6. So if we go back to this argument that retaining culture through food is crucial to individual and family happiness, we might say that instead of making the claim that this photograph is actually saying that they're happier, we might be saying, oh, as it turns out, they're not that happy. Or we could even say, this might be a claim that he's making, but there's some supplemental information that doesn't necessarily back that up. Whatever you're doing, that information needs to be used to back up the main claim, right? So it's clear when I look up general satisfaction with life that I'm tying that to this claim about family and individual happiness, as opposed to telling you the geography of Poland. I am looking up specific information that's going to help back up this main claim. So when you seek out information, don't just try to find any information, try to find information that bolsters your claim or supports it somehow, because then what you're doing is adding research to give your analysis a little bit more depth. But if you're adding research that's not relevant, it's not going to add any depth to your analysis. It's just going to force you something that's not super relevant. So one of the things that I really also want to pull out here is that when you're doing your analysis, surprise me. Even if you've done all the parts, right? You've figured out what the different photographic elements of the photograph are. You've connected them to rhetorical appeals. You've explained how those rhetorical appeals are being used to make a larger claim. If what you're saying is obvious, it's not really surprising or going into depth. Like, consider the fact that I've had to read so many of these papers in the couple of years that I've been a writing fellow, right? The whole family is smiling. That's a pathos appeal because when they're happy, it makes viewers happy. Menzel uses making viewers happy to make them agree with his stance that food makes people happy. Like, you can see where that argument just isn't compelling. If you want to talk about the way that he makes a pathos appeal that makes viewers feel happy or excited, don't just think about, is the family smiling? What does the family look like? Think about other things. Like I talked about the bright colors at use in the photograph. And flowers make people happy. People look at flowers and they feel happy. But it's not something that anyone would just immediately say, oh, the flowers make the pathos appeal, right? Seeing emotions on other people's faces often makes us respond with emotion, whereas something like the use of bright colors is not something that everyone is necessarily going to expect. So make sure that the connections that you're making are not really obvious, because one, that's not telling a compelling story, and two, there's a lot more to an analysis than just saying, well, I see the family smiling and it makes me happy, and that helps prove that food makes people happy. Like, all of those things seem very obvious and don't help move your paper along. So as I said a million times, and I know I'm repeating myself a ton, and it's because I've seen so many people struggle with this assignment, the paper is all about making connections and going deep. There are a lot of layers here, so don't be afraid to really dig into them. If you have some small thing that you've noticed about the photograph that is actually really fascinating to you, or that somehow you feel helps tell the story, but that's the super weird specific detail, don't be afraid to go into that, because that's, again, that surprises the reader. And it also, I mean, don't make a stretch, right? Like, don't say something means something when it clearly doesn't. But if you do see something and you say, wow, that's like a fascinating element of this photograph, and I want to go into detail on what I really believe that it means, then you should. Don't be afraid to dig into the layers of, of depth here, because it's not just a smiling family. Menzel makes a lot of really, really specific decisions in the way he puts his photographs together, and he does that on purpose. So really think about why he does that and all the elements of the photograph. Real quick, let's talk about your Hungry Planet photo. So consider the rhetorical appeals you use. This is something that some students do really well, but just make sure that that's central to what you're doing when you write about your Hungry Planet photo, is just considering the rhetorical appeals that you are using. Because a lot of people will be like, this photo makes an ethos appeal, this photo makes a pathos appeal, this, but really, really consider how you chose to make those appeals and talk about that, because that's kind of the main thing. It's not just like, my photograph makes a pathos appeal because I'm happy. Like, did you choose to make that appeal? How did you choose to make that appeal? What did you consider when you went into taking that photograph in terms of making a pathos appeal? Another thing that I really want to call out, which if you've already taken your photo and you haven't placed yourself in it, this is going to be hard, but consider redoing it. Have you placed yourself in the photo? Putting people in the photo is a key part of Menzel's photography. You won't look at a single photograph that's just food on a table, and it loses meaning when it's just food on a table. Even if you live alone and have difficulty finding someone who can take a picture of you, I stress trying to find a way to include yourself in your own piece, because it's really, really hard to find meaning if it's just a pile. People give context and vibrancy and meaning to the and then also, as you're composing the photo and as you're composing your reflection, really think about your audience. If you were a viewer looking at this image, what would be your takeaways and why? How do you, as the person composing the image, make people have those takeaways? I wrote this because what I mean by this is that what you really want to do is divide the photo down into its specific clear parts and then conquer each of them. So look at how each part is making a rhetorical appeal, and then look at how that use of the appeal ties to the main idea. And you want to do that with each specific element, and then you can sort of categorize them as, here are the pathos appeals that are being made, here are the ethos appeals, here are the logos appeals. Really break that photo down into its specific elements and conquer each of them on their own. I think that will help you go into depth in the analysis without getting bogged down in everything else. So that's all I have for you guys. Thanks for listening to my tip session. I am so sorry about last night. I had something come up and it was really bad, and everything's okay now. So I'm really glad that you guys were able to make it to the tip session, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, etc. You have my email address. I send you emails, so you should have my email address. And good luck as you move forward on this paper and turning your rough drafts, the first 12, into me by midnight Friday, but try to get them before midnight Friday, because I might not be able to read all of them, and then Greg will have to read some of them because I have another thing going on and it's all a big mess. So the earlier you get your draft to me, the more likely I'll be the one to look at it and tell you, hey, you didn't make those connections I was asking for. Either way, good luck, and you're getting through it, and that's kind of what matters. Okay.